All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to Illuminate, and thank you so much for coming to this session. A lot of good sessions here today. We're glad you chose us. My name is Brian Bazzello. I'm a product manager at Sumo, joined by my colleague here, Lucas, who is an engineering manager, and we both work on our metrics product. And today we're really excited to show you what our metrics product could do and how it could help you monitor and troubleshoot more effectively. So by the end of this session, you'll be able to understand what metrics are and why they complement logs, why they're so important, the speed, the efficiency, the retention. We're going to show you how easy it is to start collecting these metrics inside of Sumo Logic. For those that haven't started with this yet, we're going to show you how easy it is to do host metrics and Cloudwatch metrics from your AWS environment. And Lucas will go into some custom application metrics. And then finally, how do you combine logs and metrics together to ultimately become a better troubleshooter? How do you get proactively notified of application issues and then quickly identify the root cause of those issues? So before we get into everything, we're going to start out just talking about what metrics actually are. And we like to review this quote from a Gartner report on monitoring modern services and infrastructures. They say time series metrics are the cornerstone of effective monitoring. Just a quick question here. How many people are actually using metrics personally today to monitor and troubleshoot? Okay, not bad. It looks like about half of you. By the end of this session, you're going to know why they're so important and you're going to get started. So what exactly are metrics? Real simply, they're just numeric samples of data collected over time. The format of these metrics inside of Sumo, really simple. It's a timestamp, it's a value, and then it's a series of tags or dimensions. These are simply key value pairs that describe your metric. They uniquely identify your metric. In this example here, I'm looking at my CPU metric on my travel application in my production environment on my host called checkout number 5. Any Graphite metrics users in here? Anyone use Graphite? Okay, not too many. We won't go into detail here, but you can convert your Graphite metrics into this format. And there are a lot of benefits of having this structured format. Ultimately, when you go to analyze your metrics in Sumo Logic, you need an easy way to identify where they are. You need to group them. You need to discover them. Key value pairs are the easiest way for you to do that. What environment are you looking at? What application are you looking at? What host do you want to look at? And if you have your data structured in this simple format, you get the benefits of our native time series database. Sumo Logic started in logs, as you all know, and many of you are here for logs, but we built a whole metrics architecture to help you store and analyze this data really efficiently. And this is really going to help you monitor and troubleshoot your applications in a much richer and more efficient manner. The metrics will give you that visibility into your application performance end to end, whether it's down at the infrastructure level, your host metrics like CPU, memory, and disk, all the way up to your application. What is your end user actually seeing? Making sure you get proactively notified when things go wrong, and then help you identify where do you actually have to go to solve that issue. Your application is emitting all sorts of data, system performance data like CPU and memory and disk. What are your servers or virtual machines actually doing? Your application performance itself. How many users are logging in? How many searches are they running? How many transactions are occurring? And then you have all these events, your system events, your application events. So these might be your error logs or your debug logs, very verbose information that all of you here are collecting today through Sumo Logic. And it's important to have the right kind of data for the right job here. If you're collecting these system performance and application performance metrics, they're usually very structured. We like to think of the analogy when you go to a doctor and they measure your heart rate or your blood pressure. That's a very distinct measurement that occurs every few seconds. It's very structured. Okay, my blood pressure is high, my heart rate's at 65, 70. And then the doctor's going to ask you some questions about why your blood pressure is so high. Are you a smoker? Do you drink? Have you had 3 double-doubles from In-N-Out the other day? That's unstructured information that's best suited to logs. It's a little bit more verbose. And then if you have the top performance ones as metrics, you're going to get the benefits of long-term retention, 13 months by default in our platform. We're going to show you how good the performance is of these metrics, as well as some of the alerting capabilities.
Are you sure?
Now, if you're wondering, oh, but I also, I do these system performance metrics as logs today in Sumo, or I do these application performance as logs. We have another session tomorrow, a really exciting feature that you probably heard Ramin talk about, which is logs to metrics. Without re-instrumenting your application to turn metrics into Sumo logic, we could actually convert those into metrics for you. So we'll show you a little bit of that today, but then we have a whole session tomorrow at 10:45 to talk about this new feature. We're really excited about it. We hope you find some value out of it as well. So now if you start creating these metrics in your system, Lucas is going to show you how easy it is to do custom metrics. We'll also show you the out-of-the-box metrics that we could provide. But for those of you who aren't even using metrics today at all in your application, you might wonder, what should we actually be measuring? There's tons of frameworks out there that tell you what you should be measuring and when. We like this kind of framework from Google, which are the SRE's golden signals, measuring latency, traffic, errors, and saturation across your application. For Sumo, we do this all the time. For latency, we want to know how long does it take from the time where you send us data to the time where you could actually search on it. That's ingest latency. We want to measure that. We want to know if that ever exceeds an SLA that we provide to you, or we want to get notified if something looks wrong there. Same thing with search latency or continuous queries. In the traffic bucket, we want to know how many search queries you're running, how many scheduled searches. Again, these are measurements that we know are going to come in very frequently. We want to measure them with high performance. We want to be able to look back so we can plan operationally, months, weeks, or whatever it is. Things like errors. Of course, you have error logs, but we also want to keep track of those key KPIs on our dashboards. How many errors are we seeing in the platform? In Sumo Logic, hopefully no errors. You guys aren't hitting anything, but we do want to measure it. We do want to alert on it. And then, of course, saturation metrics. So for the underlying nodes that are running our application, your basic CPU, memory, disk, and so forth. So there are many different frameworks you could use to figure out what to measure, but oftentimes, start with the customer first. What are they experiencing? You want to make sure they don't experience any issues at all, but if they are seeing something that's slow or failing, you want to get notified of that really quickly. Okay, now you know what metrics are. I'm going to show you a little bit about how easy it is to start sending these into Sumo Logic. If you haven't done so already today, this is pretty easy. We could help you measure anything across your whole stack, whether it's at the host level on your OS itself, your cloud environment, AWS, Azure, GCP. We could collect metrics directly from them. Your applications themselves. So we have a lot of ways, depending on how you instrument your application to send metrics, we could ingest those into Sumo Logic, whether it's collectd, statsd, Dropwizard, Prometheus, etc. There are ways of getting it into Sumo Logic. And then finally, a lot of you are moving to containerized workloads, Kubernetes environments. We saw this in our data itself. We have a great session on monitoring Kubernetes tomorrow, so we won't go into detail here, but we could collect it in Sumo Logic. I'm going to go into detail on some of the first two here. So let's start with host metrics. A lot of you have gotten certified this morning or maybe in the past. Hopefully, I think if it's on level 2 or level 3, you learn how to collect, put installed collectors on your environment. We make it really easy for you to just simply, with the switch of a button, start collecting the host metrics from those systems. So if you notice here, and any installed collector in your system, you could simply go into the UI and add a source. And when you hit add source, you're going to see a bunch of options here, one of which at the bottom right is called host metrics. It's a simple click-based interface here. Choose the metrics you want to collect and choose the interval at which you want to collect them. A lot of people like collecting CPU metrics on a more frequent basis, maybe disk metrics you don't need as often, but we let you just simply check some boxes on the interface there, and that's it. The metrics start going into Sumo Logic. Now once you start collecting, you might wonder, okay, how do I get some visibility into this instantly? And that's where you could run over to our app catalog. You probably learned about this as well with our other integrations that we have, whether it's AWS-based integrations or any security type integration. We have a similar application for host metrics. So simply go to the app catalog, install the host metrics application, and point it to the data source that you just configured. We give you a whole bunch of dashboards to get started, overview dashboard to see kind of your CPU, memory, disk, network, deep dive. You could drill into CPU metrics in more detail. And of course, using some of the dashboard filters, you could pivot on a particular host or a particular cluster or whatever it is. Now, the basis of any good monitoring platform and any observability, whether it's for your particular service that you're managing, or maybe you provide observability across your whole application, is alerting. And with this metrics engine, we've introduced a whole new alerting engine that might look a little bit different from logs, but we're excited by the flexibility that this provides here. So one thing you'll notice right now, it's very visual. Metrics are visual, the time series data. When you're querying any of your metrics here, you could start creating an alert. And what you'll notice is that there are 3 types of thresholds that you can specify in these alerts. One of which is a critical threshold. So tell me if my CPU exceeds 80 in the last 5 minutes. And the nice thing you could do with this interface, I could send myself an email. I could also send a Slack message. Maybe I'll add a PagerDuty notification. You have the flexibility to send multiple notification destinations here, and that's going to be really important as you get this more granular flexibility on the alerts. You could do a warning threshold, so maybe if CPU is not looking good for the past 15 minutes, send me a notification. And then finally, another important threshold you can set with this interface is missing data. And missing data is going to be really important if you always expect that to be reporting into Sumo Logic. We have 2 options on missing data. One is, tell me if any of my metrics stop reporting. Maybe on this cluster, I always expect it to have 20 nodes. If Sumo stops seeing data from any of those nodes, I want to get notified. Might be my issue, maybe it's something upstream or downstream, but I want to get notified. And then for your more ephemeral environments where things are coming and going, that would be too noisy to get alerted on something every time it disappears. So we have an option to say, no, only tell me when everything stops reporting from this query. So lots of flexibility, very UI-driven and visual, and this is available to you for all the host metrics and other metrics you're ingesting. I won't go into too much detail on the AWS side, but I just wanted to point out how easy it is to start doing this for your Cloudwatch metrics. Similar sort of process in the UI here. Go to any of your hosted collectors that you've set up in Sumo and simply add a source. And when you add a source, you're going to see a lot of Amazon Web Services icons there, one of which is Cloudwatch metrics. You'll see here in this interface, pick the regions you want to collect from, pick the namespaces you want to collect from. We're also introducing pretty soon the ability to filter that on the tags that you want to collect. So maybe you don't want all of your RDS metrics, maybe you want it for your production level metrics, or maybe just for your application itself. But very similar to what we just saw in host metrics. So basically, choose the metrics you want to collect, head over to our app catalog and choose the dashboards and searches that you want, and then we'll pop that into your environment for you. You could go ahead, you could create those alerts that you want, and then you're good to go. So, I encourage all of you at the end of the session, when you maybe go home tonight, get a drink at the hotel, start sending some metrics into Sumo. You're going to get that visibility instantly. You're going to see the power of the metrics interface and some of the benefits of that metrics engine. And then Lucas is going to show you how you kind of combine that all together to make you a more proactive troubleshooter in your system. Get notified when things are wrong and find the root cause as quickly as possible. So now I'll pass it over to Lucas. He's going to tell you a little bit about how we actually use Sumo on Sumo every day here to monitor and troubleshoot our service for you.
Thank you, Brian. Yes, so as Brian said, fairly enough, I think right now what Sumo metrics are capable of. So let's learn a bit more about how we internally are actually using Sumo from ground up. So first of all, I want to start with just a bit of a scale that we're facing here. For that, let me just show you some numbers. So we have all of the data that is produced by all of our services on all the deployments digested directly into Sumo Logic, right? And in terms of Sumo as a metrics customer of Sumo Logic, we actually produce, on average, about 25 million data points per minute. We have 15 million plus active metrics that are continuously sending data to us, and thousands of nodes from which those metrics are coming. Now, just to visualize that a bit, let's think about it as an equivalent of about 10 to 11 terabytes of logs per day. That's quite massive. But to put it even further, that's the same as if we were measuring heart rate of all people living in the continent of Australia every minute. So that's quite a lot, right? And we're doing that all the time, continuously in real time. Now, earlier, I also mentioned that we use that for monitoring and troubleshooting, right? And what does it actually mean? Well, first of all, we use it to monitor like end-to-end performance of our whole system, of all the components within this system, and of all the parts internally that contribute to this whole system running reliably all the time for you. Apart from that, we also want to measure all of the KPIs that are important for us, not just for the engineers, also for business people, for sales, for product management, and so on. So we rely on that a lot, not just from the logs perspective, but more and more also from metrics perspective. And thirdly, in addition to logs, which are a very great tool for monitoring and troubleshooting, especially when something happens in production, we use them to enhance even further our abilities to essentially go from something happening in a production system or troubleshooting our capability somewhere in the system to actual root cause and finding what's happening there. And now, if you go further, first of all, we actually have to get the data in, right? And as Brian mentioned, we have a lot of standard sources that we can utilize to simply plug into our system from our internal infrastructure. And we use a lot of that, coming from AWS resources, from our internal systems, and all the other services. So in terms of the standard resources that we just plug in through the standard collection types, we definitely want to measure all the cluster hosts and host core resources like CPU utilization, like memory, disk usage, network, all of that, all of the golden signals that Brian mentioned earlier as well. Apart from that, we also use a lot of external resources, not coming from our code. So all of the, for example, AWS services that we use somewhere in our infrastructure, like databases, like some caches, all the CloudWatch data that we have, and a lot more. All of that is automatically transferred to us as metrics as well. We measure a lot of request-related metrics, like latency, number of requests, error, and so on. And this is also to a large extent possible with all of the standard data sources that we have. But that's not it. That's not everything that we want to measure. We want to have a full observability of our stack. And in order to achieve that, we need much more. And for that, we need custom metrics. And we actually do that a lot. If you've heard the keynote presentation from Samsung SmartThings, it's actually a very similar approach. We also think from ground up about how do we have to instrument our data, how do we have to instrument our services and all the new capabilities that we produce to make sure that when it reaches production, and even before that, we know what's going on. We have the full observability of how it's actually acting in the test environment, in production environment, how does it serve you, do you use it or not, right? So in order to do that, we have a simple Scala wrapper over a drop wizard library that can be mixed into any place in our code base so that we have a very, very simple way to add those metrics. This is very crucial to the success of any custom metrics because if engineers want to use that, they can literally do it in like 3 minutes for any custom measurement they need. So let's go through an example. Let's say we have like some very important task runner that periodically performs a very important task that has some computation inside. And let's say we want to measure the time it takes to complete this computation. And we want to measure that on all our nodes over time to spot all of the issues that might happen there. Well, it's actually very simple in our code. We just have to add 2 lines, or actually add 1 line and change 2 lines with an instrumented trait and actually the core measurement of the execution time. And that's it. We can then use it directly in metrics. Now, once we have all of our data in, we can actually start enabling the whole monitoring and troubleshooting notion. And in order to do that, as I mentioned earlier, we have a couple of goals. So all of the things like end-to-end visibility of our services, of our performance, and kind of high-level state of the system can be easily achieved through all of the dashboards that we've built and that we try to maintain along the development process, coming both from the standard sources, from CloudWatch, from host metrics, and so on, plus all of the custom data that we have as well. But that's not all of the metrics use cases. We also do that in the same way with dashboards to a large extent for all the important KPIs that we want to measure, especially over long periods of time. But apart from that, we also use metrics to enhance the whole troubleshooting process and getting to the root cause whenever something happens in production. And for that, we actually use both logs and metrics. And we really like the fact that you can go through our system, through the whole process of forming the hypothesis about the problem to verifying that through all the steps that you have in the system, like dashboards, correlating the data between logs and metrics, and if you need, also dropping that down to logs themselves to find the actual events that happened in the system. And if need be, repeat the process up to a point where we have an actual answer to the problem or we've identified what's happening there. So let's go through an example. Let's say we have a service that actually has one node that has a very high CPU load. So we actually want to drill down further and correlate that with logs from that node. And when we see what happens there is that we have suspiciously high correlation of error messages and exceptions from log side that is very, very much correlated in time with our speaking CPU. So if we go even further, we can actually drill down to the exact logs that are produced through that machine and actually, first of all, check what's happening there, possibly verify that our hypothesis is right or wrong, and iterate further or be happy because we found the root cause. Now, apart from just using the whole system from all of the out-of-the-box functionalities, it's also important to understand, to some extent at least, how it works and how to write, for example, write queries, not just on log side, but also on metric side, in order to maximize the benefits of that and make sure that you're using it correctly. So let's take as an example one metric that's very spiky right now. And the reason for that is because we've been using the quantization slightly wrong, because what happens in this scenario is the data produced is actually produced more or less every minute rather than much more frequently. So the quantization level of something like 10 seconds is not going to be very, very nice, because we're going to have a lot of noise coming just from the fact that the different nodes that are producing this metric might be actually producing it in different periods of time. So if we aggregate it over slightly longer periods of time, we're going to see that the metric itself smooths, and we actually have the correct data drawn on the chart. So I heavily encourage you all to take the certification and to read more about the documentation of the metrics query language. It's really powerful. It has a lot of customizability, and it allows a lot of really nice operators as well. Now, let's get to something even more interesting. So you will definitely, like a lot of you will definitely have a lot of logs already. And not all the data might already be instrumented with metrics, especially all the custom metrics. We have a lot of the data actually residing in logs already, right? So why not use this, the fact that this data that you have is in fact a time series data, and let Sumo allow that. So let's take a use case here. We have, this is actual query that we can run on one of our test environments, and it actually gets the log messages related to DPM calculation. So it actually is a number of DPM produced by one of the test accounts, for example, right? And now, this is a log. So we can extract some value from that and start treating it as metric, which we normally do with the current system purely by log visualizations, right? So it's actually very, very easy to set it up. In order to do that, we just need 3 simple steps. First step is to actually set up the scope. The scope is nothing more than just a selector of the log query. So we just have to provide it with whatever are the logs that are relevant to this metric. Now, the second step is just telling it how to parse out the data that's going to be used as the actual metric value and the other dimensions that will identify the metric. Once we have done that, we can just take a quick look and check whether we did it correctly. So in this example, our actual metric value is going to be the DPM field, and we can use any subset of the other fields to actually make the metric identifier. And in our example, we're just going to use the customer ID and content type so that we can filter on that later in the query tab on metrics side. So the last step is to actually define that. So we just have to tick the correct dimensions we want to tackle and we want to filter through and check which field is actually the metric itself. Once that's done, we can actually have a really nice summary information at the bottom of the screen that has a couple of useful statistics like the estimated DPM generated for that rule or estimated unique time series or unique metrics count that you're going to generate for your system. Plus some quota available for you as a customer on the metrics side. Now, once this is done, we can already query this data. And this is blazingly fast compared with log queries that are also doable, very powerful. You can drill down even further along the dimensions that are not necessarily defined in the query here. But this is absolutely great. And I'm extremely pleased to say that we've actually enabled this feature for all the customers that attend the Illuminate conference. So you can go and use that right now. If you have any questions about that, or it doesn't work for you, or it was not correctly enabled for you, feel free to reach out to me or Brian. We're going to make sure to have that enabled for you as soon as possible. And with that, I'm going to pass back to Brian so we can talk about even more really cool features that are upcoming.
Awesome. Thanks, Lucas. So now we're going to turn it over to the demos now. I'm excited to show you guys a sneak peek of what's to come in the world of Sumo Logic when it relates to dashboards. We love our dashboards. I'm a product manager. I've been working at Sumo for a while. Dashboards go a really long way today. But we really, we built them when we had logs. And now with metrics in the picture, you could use them as they are today, but we have a lot of nice improvements we want to make. We've been listening to your feedback. We want to introduce some new capabilities. So I'm here to show you kind of what we're working on now that we're going to have in preview in your environments in a few months here. When you're working with metrics, this is like, imagine going into the emergency room and there's something wrong with your application. You need to take the vital signs immediately. Sumo Logic, we're a microservices-based application. We're all in AWS. We have hundreds of microservices, and if I'm in charge of giving, observability to my own application, or maybe I work as an SRE, and I want to make sure everyone has visibility into the health of their application, I don't have time to make a dashboard for every single microservice. I don't have time to make a dashboard for every team. But this is where we introduce the power of what's called template variables. For those of you that have used search templates, this is kind of similar, but now we're putting it on the dashboards. So what you see here might look pretty similar to the current dashboards, but there's a few things to note. Number one, at the top here, we have these drop-down menus that are kind of like filters of what we have in dashboards today. But you'll see here I have a pick list. And the question is, how do you generate the values that are in this drop-down? And for us at Sumo Logic, again, we have microservices that spin up and down. We have new teams joining, new applications we want to build. I don't have time to make sure all the values, to statically type those in. I'm going to power that by a metrics query itself. And I'm going to say, run this metrics query and give me all the values from that query for source category. That's how we're labeling our clusters. So now if Lucas builds a new service tomorrow, puts up a new assembly, he can go back to this dashboard and it's going to appear in that drop-down menu. So this is great. The template variables give you that extensibility to enable your other teams to use this. Now the other thing about being a microservices-based application and using metrics to your advantage is getting a quick overview on the health of your overall system. And what we have here is one of our services called CQ Splitter. I have a very quick glimpse at all of the different hosts in this cluster. And you'll notice I could color code them by a value. So we're looking at the CPU of every single host on the cluster. It gives me a very quick way to spot these anomalies, look at the trends happening on any of these hosts and see, okay, looks like number 7 here is increasing quite a bit. Again, you're taking the vital signs of your system. Metrics are really fast to do that. And now when I give this to another team, say the team that's running the Forge assembly, I want them to use the same dashboard. I want them to get that instant visibility. And their cluster has a different number of nodes here. It looks like they have over 30 hosts. But again, these things spin up and down all the time. We're auto-scaling as you guys send us more data. So this is going to change every time you load it up, every time you update it. Again, I don't have to program it each time. We have the capabilities now to repeat these panels based on a variable that you select. So in this case, this is pretty powerful because now I could scroll through quickly, take a look at which hosts are running a little bit hot. Again, I could look at different metrics here. And this is just the first layer. These are the metrics. These are telling me how is my system running, what's the overall health of it. Now you can imagine a time where you do identify there's a particular host that's not looking too good. Maybe the memory's pegged or the CPU is high, and you want to go in and inspect that host with a little bit more detail. Again, the metrics, they load quickly. They're structured, they're stored in a separate database for us, so you get that performance benefit of quickly searching through any different host here, updating these dashboards instantly, taking a look at some of those metrics, and that's great. So now maybe I've gotten an alert, it's sent it to a particular team, they loaded up a metrics dashboard, they could look at this, and they could go in and start troubleshooting a little bit more here. So in this example, maybe there isn't that much happening on this host, but let's say the CPU is high. The doctor goes in, they say your blood pressure is high. I need to go look at the logs because I don't know what's wrong with this system. We're excited to introduce this feature in this platform that allows you to instantly pivot to the related logs for that particular host. So in this case, maybe I want to view all logs, maybe I want to view all of the error logs. And what's really nice here is that with the click of a button, I could start looking at the related logs to those metrics that I was looking at. This is really critical when you need to go from that signal to the root cause. And we'll take in that metadata that came from that metric. So remember when you set up those host metrics or you sent us those custom metrics, you're going to include some of those tags that we were showing you earlier, and those are reflected here. Ideally, your logs and your metrics are coming from the same sources, they're tagged with the same data, because context is always going to be important for you to figure out, where's my application hurting right now, and where do I go to zoom into the details. So that's what's great about these templated dashboards, is that we'll give you all of that context in one place. We'll let you quickly pivot down to those logs and ultimately get you down to root cause as quickly as possible. Again, this is sort of on our dev environment right now. We're excited to roll this out to you in the coming months. A few other cool features that we want to roll into our new dashboards. Edit the dashboard visualizations without leaving the dashboard itself. This is kind of nice. So that I don't have to go into the search tab or the metrics tab every time. You'll notice here, I could add multiple metrics queries, multiple logs queries on top of each other. And this is going to be really helpful, again, for correlating metric performance with maybe underlying log events and help you identify, okay, CPU is running hot and it looks like maybe some errors are coming in. That's going to give you the quicker root cause analysis. And we're really excited to start introducing this to you soon. Another thing here, this is all API first from the ground up. So if you want to programmatically manage these through your API, create them, update them, whatever it is, we're excited that these will be built from the ground up with APIs. So with that, let's go back to the presentation here and wrap up. We have a few minutes left for questions. Can we switch back to the presentation, please? So, this was a quick session. There's a lot you could do with metrics. Hopefully, by now you learned what metrics are, how you could start collecting them. First thing to do, especially if you haven't been using metrics yet today, Sumo or otherwise, see if your application's emitting metrics, see if your team is using them, how are they instrumenting it, get a sense of what your application's actually doing there. Number 2, go in and set up host metrics. This is the one-click thing where you go to your source, go to your collector, add those sources, start visualizing the data, play around with it. Take the host metrics, take the CloudWatch metrics. And again, as Lucas pointed out, we're really excited to roll out this logs to metrics feature. So you don't have to re-instrument your code right now. We know you don't have time to always do that. but Sumo Logic will help you take your existing logs, extract metrics out of it, or compute new metrics from it, and then you'll get the benefits of the metrics platform. 13 months retention, high performance, and those alerting capabilities that you saw earlier. So thank you guys so much for coming to this session. Hope you learned a lot. Love to open it up to questions now, and then of course, if we don't get time to answer your question, or you want to bother us with a feature request or a question, come find us at the conference. Love to talk to you guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Brian and Lucas. So if you have a question, please raise your hand and I'll bring you the mic.
We have
one over here.
question there.
I've seen like you're saying like we need to set up the hosted collectors. So what about if you have an agent already running on the EC2 instance or any VM, and would that collect the metrics, so like CPU and memory? Or like do we need to separately install the hosted collector?
You want to take that one?
Oh, go on.
Okay. So no, it doesn't matter. You could send your CPU, you could send your host metrics to installed or hosted.
That means do we need to configure that in the JSON files, like to collect the CPU and the memory in the agent side?
You need to have a separate source for that, but it can be the same collector.
Actually, I didn't hear.
Sorry. You need to set up separate source, but it can be the same collector as far as I understand.
So once we do that, like, does it already know that it's coming, the logs and the metrics are coming from the same instance?
Yeah, so if it's coming from the same collector, ideally the metadata is going to be the same. So your source category, your source host, that'll be unified because that's going to help you connect those metrics to the logs that you've already been collecting. So you don't have to change the metadata configuration there. The metrics that you do emit through that collector will inherit the source host, the source category, and all of that. So that's how you're going to help connect those metrics to the logs later. So no additional
unless you override it somehow, but yeah, the good practice is to actually keep it the same, right? So that you will be able actually to use all the benefits of correlation then.
Yeah, that's what I want to clarify.
Yep.
Yeah.
And just the last question, like, do you have much, like on the RDS, like Amazon RDS instances, it's like how does this metrics works other than they provide? So can you dig deep into the logs of the RDS instances? How does Sumo Logic support RDS, Amazon RDS instances?
Sure, yeah. There we go.
All right, so you can instrument CloudWatch for sure to get the metrics from CloudWatch for RDS instances. I'm not sure if we do anything on logs. I mean, we do logs, but I'm not sure if we automatically, I don't think we automatically convert them into metrics. So we can get in touch with the collection team, but the metrics themselves are generated separately.
Yeah, so you'll have to set up a separate log collection and a separate metrics collection for RDS, but they'll be tied together by that namespace tagging that you already have, any of the custom tags you're using in your AWS environment, so we'll help you connect the dots there. But today, you do have to configure the logs collection separate from the metrics collection. Yep.
Any other questions?
Hi, my name is Shivika Jindal. While Sumo Logic is a great way to analyze our logs, I have usually noticed that the more we go back in time to collect logs, the longer it takes. In my experience, collecting logs for, like, let's say, past month has taken up to 10 minutes, but going back, let's say, 6 months back, it has taken an hour. So I thought, okay, maybe how about I open 2 different windows from the same account and run 2 different queries, but apparently it's just one query that runs at a time and stops the other one. So is that something you guys are planning to work on?
So I guess that's more log related. You're talking about log query, right? Or metrics query?
Oh, shit. Put the headphones in. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
So you were talking about logs query or metrics query?
Logs query.
Oh yeah, so for that, we're probably not the best people to answer the question, but yes, in general, metrics queries on long time ranges are expected to be much faster. So one of the things you could do is just try to set up the logs to metrics rules for the data sets that you're most interested with and use that instead, for sure.
Yeah, we feel the pain on the long time it takes for long log searches, and that's because you have to go through every log message, parse it, aggregate it. So converting it to metrics is going to be a fantastic way to get that performance.
So I'm
60-day query, it'll take...
as well, or? Okay, so we can take it offline as well. There's a couple of engineers that are going to be very willing to help you out with that as well.
Any other questions?
Oh, we got one up front here.
Yep.
Yes, my name's Tony Drain. I'm with Pure Storage.
Mm-hmm.
Are you guys going to offer a tool to export metrics from one service to your service? So let's say I'm using a company called Beta Hog, or it might rhyme with Beta Hog. Would it be a way that I could transfer my dashboards, my metrics over?
But you mean also with a fallback in the past, or we don't have that right now. Although you could, you wouldn't be able to do that for the large time range in the past, because we have some safeguards against that. I don't know if we have.
Yeah, I guess it depends on the metric system that you want to pull from into Sumo Logic. We have some customers that might be sending metrics to one place, then they fork it off and also send it to Sumo. That's one way. As far as forwarding it directly from the other service to Sumo, it depends on kind of what APIs they have for us to pull it. You could write scripts to pull stuff from other platforms, no problem, send it into our collectors. It will depend on whatever that platform is.
But we can absolutely take it offline and talk in more details about it, for sure.
Yeah, cool, thanks.
Okay, thank you so much
Cool.
for attending.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you,
Appreciate it.
Lucas.
Thank you.
All right.